Hi everyone, this is Sarah with HoopSisters. For this video of the Where the Heart Is quilt, we are going to be doing the fall tree base section and then the fall tree, which is the top of the tree. Right now we're working on the base. Here are all of our prepared fabrics. So this is for the grass, this is for the fall background, and then this is the tree trunk. As you can see, I've already hooped my stabilizer and I've done my placement stitch for both of these sections. Normally we would use a water-soluble thread. I did opt to use a darker colored thread so that you guys could see it in this video. The next step is that we are going to tack down the tree trunk. So we will place these pieces right side up. We are going to use water-soluble thread, and I'll get these pieces tacked down. Okay, so now that we've completed step 2, including trimming along these seams a 1/4 inch, we are going to move on to steps 3 and 4, which is tacking down our background fabric. So I've got our rectangles cut right here. This is going to cover this area right here, and then this area right here. How we're going to do this is we will sew a seam when the fabric is right side down. We'll sew that seam and then we'll flip it later and tack it down. To make sure you have it placed right, I normally line it up where it needs to cover everything. You can just use your finger and kind of lightly finger press where it's going to stitch that seam, and then you'll know when I line this up, that's right side down, I'll kind of need to line it up just like that. So you'll kind of have to play with it a little bit to make sure you get it in the right location. Now I'm going to take this over to the machine and I'll do steps 3 and 4. Okay, so as you can see, we've completed steps 3 and 4 to tack down the background fabric with this seam. I also went ahead and just trimmed straight along that other raw edge piece, just about to get about 1/4 inch in my seam right there. Now we can move on to steps 5 and 6. We will use the same stitch and flip technique to tack down the grass fabric on either side of the tree trunk. Okay, so now we're moving on to steps 7, 8, 9, and 10. For each of these 4 steps, we will keep the water-soluble thread and the needle of our machine. These steps will tack down our background and our grass fabric. Prior to tacking it down, just make sure you're flipping those up. Finger press this seam smooth, and then you can go ahead and tack those down. Okay, so I have trimmed the fall tree base sections according to our instructions, and now I'm going to set these off to the side for a little bit, and we are going to move on to the fall tree, the top of it. I've already prepped all of our supplies for it. So here we have our fall background fabric. This is our tree background fabric. We have our 4 different colors for our tree fabric, and this was a 5x5 square. I've pressed it in half so that there's a nice curve right there, and then I've tacked that down with a blanket stitch on each of those 4 pieces. Here is our backing fabric, and then we are going to go ahead and use the optional wool batting in this one. I've already prepared it by pressing the edges so that your presser foot does not get caught when you're tacking that down. And then I've also hooped some battleizer, and I did complete step 1. I did this with dark thread. Again, the instructions say to do this with water-soluble thread to help avoid some of that bulk on the edges. I just did it with the dark thread so that everyone could see it nicely. So I'm going to move on now and do step 2 as well. Step 2, we're going to place this wool in that placement stitch, and then I'll use water-soluble thread to tack this down. Okay, so here we've completed steps 2 and 3. Step 2 did the zigzag tack down around the edge of the batting, and then step 3, again with water-soluble thread, it stitched a pattern right here for us to use for step 4. And step 4, we are going to take the tree background fabric, line it up in here, and then we are again going to use water-soluble thread and tack this down. Okay, so now that we've completed the tack down of the tree background fabric, we'll move on to step 5. I'm going to place a brown thread in the needle, and step 5 will sew some detail for the tree branches. Okay, for step 6, we will be using all 4 of our prepared pieces for the tree, and we will need to line them up as they are in the picture in your instructions. Just kind of line the edges with these. And then we will sew a tack down with water-soluble thread once we have them placed like we want them. Okay, so now we've got our tree fabric tacked down, and we are going to move on to steps 7 and 8. So we have these 2 pieces of background fabric. For steps 7 and 8, you'll want a neutral thread in the needle, and you will place right side down over the tree. You'll sew your seam right here, and same with this side on step 8, and it'll sew a seam right here for our background fabric. After we've sewed the seam on the background fabric in step 8, we'll flip these right side up and we'll finger press that seam smooth. Now in step 9, we are going to use water-soluble thread in the needle, and we will tack down both of these sides. Now we're moving on to step 10. Step 10, you will use this section from the tree base section, and we're going to have to find a couple match points. It's going to start over here on the left-hand side, and we'll place this right side down. What we'll do with the machine is we can use the hand wheel to go very slowly and lower the needle and make sure that we have this in the correct position. Now that we've found our match point for step 10, we are going to move on and find our match points for step 11, 12, and 13. Now that we have these match points down and the correct position on each one, we can kind of flip this up and peek and make sure that it's lining up perfectly. Then we'll switch to neutral thread in the needle, and we will sew a seam along this line. Moving on to steps 15 through 18, this is where we will flip the tree base section right side up. We will have to find a match point in this corner. Then we'll come over here to this side of the tree trunk, the next side, and then finally there will be a match point over on this side. This will make sure that we have this in the right location. So again, this is steps 15 through 18. Now that we found each of our 4 match points, we will use water-soluble thread again, and we will sew the final tack down along the edges of this piece right here. Steps 20 through 23 are very similar to finding the match points on the last tree base section. Again, this section will be right side down, and we will find our match point on this corner, and then there will be 2 on the tree base, and then 1 on the edge again. Okay, so now that we found our match points, we'll proceed to step 24. We will sew our seam along this edge with neutral thread in the needle. For steps 25 through 28, we will flip the tree base section right side up, and then again you'll have to find your 4 match points with water-soluble thread. Just like the last few steps, it's been over here on the left side. You'll have 1 right here on the trunk, another one here, and then 1 on the right side. Now that we've completed tacking down the 4 match points, we will leave water-soluble thread in the needle, and we'll move on to step 29 to sew the remainder of the tack down. For step 30, we will take our backing fabric and we're going to place it on the back of the hoop. You can kind of see the outside of our placement stitch. We'll just make sure that it lines up with that, and then we are going to have water-soluble thread in the needle, and we will sew the tack down. Now that we've added our backing fabric, we can go ahead and turn off the automatic thread cutter on our machine. For the remaining steps, we will just be sure to match the thread and the needle with the thread and the bobbin. Step 31 is going to sew the quilting in the background. For step 32, which is our final step before trimming, you will place your tree accent thread in the needle and in the bobbin, and you'll go ahead and stitch out that detail. So once you're done with all of those steps and putting your block together, you'll go ahead and bring that over to the trimming table to trim how the instructions read. What I do is I bring that last page from the instructions over because it'll tell me exactly how I need to trim each side of this block. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so now that our block is completely trimmed, we can go ahead and move on to the rest of the blocks in this fall row.